The roar of the inferno was a physical blow, a wave of searing heat that promised obliteration. Through the churning black smoke and the angry orange flames devouring the sedan, a tattooed hand, raw and bleeding, desperately gripped the collar of an old man, his face a mask of terror. This was the moment, the razor's edge between life and a fiery grave. And the man pulling, the man risking it all while others just watched, just filmed. He was the one they called Thug, the one they crossed the street to avoid, the one whose story they thought they already knew. They were about to learn how wrong they were. This isn't just a story of a rescue. It's a testament to the unwavering courage that can lie dormant beneath the roughest exterior, a story about the indomitable American spirit that refuses to bow, even when facing the very gates of hell. Marcus Thorne, or Mace as he was known to the few who interacted with him beyond a wary nod, navigated his existence with the low, guttural rumble of his heavily customized Harley-Davidson. It was more than a machine. It was an extension of his solitude, a steel companion that asked no questions and offered no judgments. His arms, corded with the kind of muscle forged from years wrestling stubborn engines and unforgiving steel, were a roadmap of his past, etched in faded blue and black ink, dragons breathing unseen fire, skulls that grinned silent warnings, symbols whose meanings were lost the most, or perhaps simply never inquired about. A thin, silvery scar bisected his left eyebrow, a memento from a chapter of his life he kept bolted shut, much like the reinforced door to his modest dwelling above, Mace's Motor Works. His garage, tucked away on the grittier, less polished edge of Harmony Creek, was his sanctuary. The air inside was thick, a heady perfume of aged motor oil, hot metal, vulcanized rubber, and the faint, lingering ghost of exhaust fumes. It was a cathedral of controlled chaos, tools laid out with an almost surgical precision on worn wooden benches, engine blocks in various states of disassembly, and the gleaming chrome of bikes he was coaxing back to life. Here, amid the tangible logic of mechanics, Mace found a piece that the outside world seldom offered. He was a craftsman of undeniable skill, his large, calloused hands possessing a surprising delicacy when diagnosing a sputtering engine or lacing a new wheel. Customers, often other bikers or those with machines too old or too specialized for mainstream shops, came for his expertise, not his conversation. His words were few, his voice a gravelly baritone that seemed to vibrate with a tightly coiled tension, as if he expected every interaction to turn sour. Years prior, he'd worn a different kind of uniform, the digital camouflage of the U.S. Army. It wasn't a glorious chapter filled with medals and commendations, but rather a crucible that had hammered some discipline into his rebellious youth. He'd learned about chain of command, the importance of meticulous attention to detail, and the stark reality that hesitation could have irreversible consequences. He'd seen men at their best and their worst, and had come away with a quiet respect for resilience and an even quieter disdain for pretense. The Army had given him skills, a way to channel his intensity, but hadn't quite smoothed the jagged edges that society seemed to snag upon when he returned. Harmony Creek, like many small towns, was wary of what it didn't immediately understand, and Mace, with his stoic silence, his formidable presence, and the artwork that adorned his skin, was an enigma they'd largely chosen to label and dismiss. So he'd built his walls, brick by perceived slight, comment by judgmental stare. He expected little and gave little way, his independence a hard-won fortress. Yet, beneath that carefully constructed armor, flickers of a different man sometimes escaped. The neighborhood kids, initially intimidated, soon learned that a broken skateboard wheel or a deflated bicycle tire would be mended at Mace's, often with gruff instruction to be more careful next time, and never request for payment. A scrawny stray cat, dubbed Grease by Mace, now at a permanent, if unofficial, residence in a warm corner of the garage, a silent recipient of leftover scraps and the occasional absent-minded scratch behind the ears. These were the quiet acts, the unsigned deeds of a man who understood what it was to be an outsider, to be vulnerable. He possessed an old-school American work ethic, a belief in self-reliance, and a deeply buried, almost begrudging, sense of duty to protect those genuinely unable to protect themselves. He'd never articulate it, would likely deny it if accused, but it was there, an ember glowing beneath the ashes of cynicism. Just that morning, as he'd picked up his coffee at the local diner, he'd felt the familiar chill. Old Mrs. Gable, her purse clutched tightly, had visibly flinched when he'd held the door for her, her mumbled, "Thank you," barely audible, her eyes darting away as if he were a coiled rattlesnake. He hadn't reacted, just nodded, the familiar ache of being prejudged settling in his gut. It was the daily tax he paid for looking the way he did, for not fitting their mold. It was a sweltering Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sun beat down relentlessly, baking the asphalt of Elm Street until heat mirages dance above its surface. Mace was navigating the familiar route back from a parts supplier in the next county, a meticulously rebuilt carburetor for a classic Indian chief motorcycle resting securely in its foam packaging within his saddlebag. He was mentally running through the insulation sequence, the precise adjustments needed to make the old V-twin sing again. As he approached the notoriously chaotic intersection of Elm and Highway 12, the traffic light ahead turned amber. He was already decelerating, his heavy, steel-toed motorcycle boot instinctively moving to cover the rear brake pedal. Then, the ordinary fabric of the afternoon was violently torn apart. An ear-splitting screech of tortured rubber, a sound that spoke of desperate, futile braking, was immediately followed by the sickening, hollow boom of metal impacting metal at high velocity. Mace's head snapped up, his focus instantly sharpening. A late-model blue SUV, its driver clearly oblivious or reckless, had barreled to the red light and T-boned an older, beige station wagon that had been cautiously making a left turn on its green arrow. The impact was devastating. The SUV, its front end grotesquely accordioned, spun a full 180 degrees before shuddering to a halt. The station wagon, struck with brutal force directly on the driver's side door, was catapulted sideways, its frame contorted with an awful metallic scream before it crashed against a concrete curb, teetering at a precarious angle. For a horrifying, suspended moment, an unnatural quiet descended, the kind of stunned silence that invariably follows sudden, catastrophic violence. Then, the spell broke, and chaos erupted like a shattered dam. Car horns blared from the rapidly accumulating traffic jam. People were shouting, their voices a confused, panicked chorus. Mace's eyes, trained by instinct and experience, immediately locked onto the station wagon. A thin, greasy wisp of black smoke was already coiling from beneath its crumpled hood. Then, more alarmingly, another tendril of smoke, darker and more ominous, began to see from the rear of the vehicle, near where the gas tank would be. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, tightened Mace's chest. This was bad. This was escalating. Fast. He saw figures moving now. Other drivers cautiously exiting their vehicles, their faces pale with shock. Pedestrians on the sidewalk had frozen, hands flying to their mouths, their expressions a mixture of horror and disbelief. Cell phones were already emerging, glinting in the harsh sunlight. Some, he hoped, were dialing 911. Others, he noted with familiar pang of distaste, were already held aloft, recording the unfolding tragedy. The smoke from the station wagon was no longer wispy. It was a thick, angry column, blackening the clear blue sky. And then, he saw it, a terrifying, undeniable flicker of orange near the rear wheel well, a hungry tongue of flame tasting the leaking gasoline. His gaze swept the interior of the stricken station wagon. He could make out the slumped figure of an elderly man in the driver's seat, his head lolled against a buckled doorframe, his white hair a stark contrast against the shadowed interior. He wasn't moving, or at least not significantly. The crowd was swelling, forming a ragged semicircle around disaster, a gallery of horrified onlookers. Their voices were a discordant babble of fear and helplessness. "Someone do something," a woman shrieked. "Get back! It's going to explode," another man yelled, pulling his companion further away from the scene. But no one was moving towards a burning car. They were rooted to the spot, trapped by a potent cocktail of fear, shock, and a morbid fascination. The flames, though still relatively small, were growing an awful, relentless hunger. The window of opportunity was slamming shut with every passing second. A ghost of memory, sharp and unwelcome, flickered across Mace's mind, a different fire in a different dust-choked land, a moment of crucial hesitation, a life lost that should have been saved. The familiar sting of that old guilt, a regret he carried like shrapnel in his soul, was an instant spur. He blinked, shoving the memory back into the dark recesses where it lived. He wouldn't just stand there. He couldn't. His jaw clenched, transforming his already rugged features into a mass of grim determination. With a decisive clang of metal on asphalt, he kicked down the stand of his Harley, not even sparing a thought for the gleaming machine he usually babied. There was only the fire, rapidly becoming an inferno, and the old man trapped within its deadly embrace. He didn't walk, he sprinted. His heavy engineer boots, usually a symbol of his unhurried, deliberate pace, pounded the pavement, each stride eating up the rapidly shrinking distance to the blazing wreck. The heat radiating from the car was already a palpable force, a physical wave pushing against him, carrying the acrid stench of burning rubber and melting plastic. He could hear someone from the crowd shout, his voice thin with alarm. "Hey, you! Get back! It's too dangerous, man." Mace didn't falter, didn't look back. Danger was a currency he'd dealt in before. It was the paralysis of others in its face that he found intolerable. He reached the driver's side of the station wagon. The door was a mangled catastrophe, bent and jammed with such violence that it was fused into the car's frame. The old man inside was stirring now, his eyes, wide and milky with cataracts and sheer terror, fluttering open. His lips moved, forming silent, desperate pleas. Smoke, thick and gray, was beginning to fill the cabin, obscuring the grandpa's features. Mace grabbed the twisted door handle and yanked, throwing all his weight into it. Nothing. The metal groaned in protest, but didn't budge. "Sir, can you hear me?" Mace yelled, his voice rough, amplified by the urgency of the moment. The old man let out a weak, rattling cough, a sound that spoke of lungs already struggling. "Hang on. I'm coming for you." Mace roared, the promise as much for himself as for the trapped victim. He rapidly scanned the mangled door, his eyes darting to the window. The safety glass was a mosaic of fractures, but still stubbornly in place. He needed something to break it, some leverage. His gaze swept the immediate area. Nothing but asphalt and stunned faces. He balled his right fist, the knuckles already scarred from countless encounters with unyielding steel, and, ignoring the thick leather of his glove, smashed it against the window. A sickening jolt of pain shot up his arm to his shoulder, but the glass only starred further, refusing to yield completely. Not enough force. He needed more. The flames at the rear of the car were no longer just licking. They were a roaring, hungry beast, climbing the sides of the vehicle, reaching with greedy tendrils towards the passenger cabin. The heat was becoming unbearable, stinging his exposed skin, making the air shimmer. He could smell it now, the terrifyingly sweet, cloying odor of raw gasoline mixing with the acrid smoke of burning upholstery. He tried the door handle again, one last desperate attempt, his muscles straining, veins bulging like thick ropes on his neck and arms. The tortured metal shrieked, but held fast. He could see the old man's face more clearly for a moment, contorted in a rictus of fear and dawning despair, his eyes fixed on Mace with a desperate, pleading intensity. That look, that raw vulnerability, sliced through Mace's adrenaline-fueled focus, hitting that deeply buried core of fierce, almost paternal protectiveness. He would not fail this man. He could not fail. The fire was now a living entity, a monstrous predator roaring its triumph as it devoured the back half of the station wagon. The heat was a physical assault, forcing Mace to squint, to shield his face with his forearm. Acrid black smoke billowed from every compromised seal, making his eyes stream and his throat constrict. The sinister crackle and pop of the flames intensified, punctuated by small, sharp explosions within the inferno, a tire bursting with a violent bang. Then another, sending showers of glowing embers into the smoke-filled air. The crowd gasped audibly, a collective intake of horrified breath, some instinctively recoiling further. But Mace stood his ground, his world narrowed to this single, desperate point of conflict. His focus was absolute. He knew, with a grim certainty, that the door was a lost cause without heavy tools he didn't possess. The window. It had to be the window. He glanced down at his left boot, the one with the reinforced steel toe. Taking as deep a breath as the smoke-choked air would allow, he planted his right foot for balance and unleashed a powerful, driving kick, aiming for the center of the driver's side window. The already fractured glass spiderwebbed violently, but, with infuriating stubbornness, held its form. He kicked again, harder this time, a guttural grunt forced from his lips by the sheer effort, ignoring the fresh, jarring pain that radiated up his leg. On the third, savage kick, fueled by a desperate surge of power, the window finally imploded, showering the interior with deadly fragments and sending a cascade of glass skittering across the hot asphalt. "Cover your face!" he bellowed at the old man, who made a feeble, uncoordinated attempt to lift a trembling hand. Mace thrust his arm through the jagged opening, his gloved hand sweeping away the remaining shards of glass clinging to the window frame, heedless of the razor-sharp edges. One particularly vicious sliver sliced through the thick protective leather of his glove and into the flesh of his forearm, drawing a crimson line of blood, but he barely registered the new injury. The interior of the car was now an oven. Thick, choking black smoke poured out of the broken window, engulfing Mace in a blinding, suffocating cloud, forcing him to cough violently, his lungs burning. He could barely discern the old man's shape through the blinding, acrid haze. "I've got you. We need to move. Now!" Mace shouted, his voice raspy, each word an effort. He reached further into the inferno, his arm extended, feeling blindly for the seatbelt release mechanism. His fingers, clumsy in the thick glove, fumbled with the buckle, which was slick with the old man's sweat and now a smear of Mace's own blood. The grandpa was moaning softly, a low, continuous sound of pain and terror, his eyes half closed, rolling back. He was losing consciousness. The flames were now visibly creeping along the headliner inside the car, tiny, hungry tongues of fire just inches from the grandpa's white hair. The plastic of the dashboard was starting to melt and drip, releasing even more noxious fumes. Mace's fingers finally found the release button. He pressed hard. Click. The blessed sound of the seatbelt disengaging. "Okay, lean toward me. Try to help me pull you. Try." But the old man was almost entirely dead weight now, his body limp, unresponsive. Mace hooked his left arm under the grandpa's armpits, trying to get a secure, balanced grip. The heat on his face, his neck, his exposed arms, was almost beyond endurance. His meticulously inked tattoos felt like they were being seared into his skin anew. His lungs burned with every shallow, smoke-filled breath. He could feel the scorching heat penetrating his thick leather jacket, as if the fire itself was trying to claw its way through to him. The distant shouts of the crowd were a muffled, irrelevant noise now, their faces indistinct blurs through the shimmering heat haze and the veil of his intense, tunnel-vision concentration. He could hear the approaching wail of sirens, but they sounded like they were miles away, an abstract concept, far too slow to matter in this desperate, immediate battle. It was just him and the old man and the fire that was seconds away from claiming them both. He planted his feet firmly on the asphalt, bracing himself against the car, and pulled. The grandpa was surprisingly heavy, and the awkward angle, pulling him upwards and outwards to the narrow opening, made the task incredibly difficult. For one heart-stopping, terrifying moment, he thought he wouldn't be able to do it. The old man's arm snagged on the twisted metal of the steering column. Panic, cold and sharp as a shard of glass, tried to pierce through Mace's wall of resolve. He fought it down with a surge of raw will. He adjusted his grip, gritting his teeth so hard his jaw ached, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Come on, damn it," he snarled, The words ripped from him, more animalistic than human. He pulled again, a desperate, primal heave, channeling every ounce of his formidable strength, every fiber of his being, every flicker of that old army grit, into this one critical effort. He felt something give, the old man's body shifting, sliding reluctantly through the opening. He could smell his own hair singeing from the proximity of the flames. The roar of the fire was deafening now, a terrifying crescendo. It was now or it was never, with a final, monumental surge of effort, fueled by a potent cocktail of pure adrenaline, desperate hope, and an unbreakable will. Mace hauled the elderly man's frail body through the shattered window. It was a brutal, graceless extraction. The grandpa's clothes snagged on jagged metal. His limbs scraped against the remnants of glass. But Mace didn't dare pause, didn't dare relent. He dragged him clear, stumbling backwards, away from the ravenous, all-consuming flames. Just as the entire front cabin of the station wagon erupted, a violent whoosh of superheated air and a mushrooming plume of thick black smoke rocketing skyward as the dashboard, seats, and remaining interior components ignited completely. If they had been even 5 seconds slower. Mace slammed the door on that thought. He couldn't let it in. He half-carried, half-dragged the grandpa's inert form a safe distance away, onto the relative coolness of the grass median strip. Finally collapsing to his knees beside him, Mace's chest was heaving, his lungs screaming for clean, untainted air, his body trembling with exertion and the receding tide of adrenaline. The old man lay on the grass, coughing violently, a deep, racking sound, his face pale beneath a layer of soot and grime, but his eyes were fluttering open. Alive. Against all odds, he was alive. For a long moment, Mace just knelt there, gasping, the furious roar of the now fully engulfed station wagging a hellish backdrop behind him. The wail of approaching sirens, no longer distant, finally sliced through the ringing in his ears, growing louder, closer. Figures in crisp blue uniforms, paramedics, looking impossibly clean and calm amidst the chaos, were suddenly there, rushing towards him with a gurney, oxygen masks, and medical bags. They moved with practiced efficiency, their voices calm and professional, as they quickly began assessing the grandpa, fitting an oxygen mask over his face, checking his vitals. A wave of profound exhaustion, so deep it was almost dizzying, washed over Mace. The adrenaline, that incredible life-saving fuel, began to drain away, leaving in its wake a dull, throbbing ache in every muscle, the sharp sting of multiple burns on his hands and face, and a searing pain in his forearm where the glass had laid it open. He looked at the old man, who was now breathing more steadily, though still raggedly, under the oxygen mask. The grandpa's eyes, watery and bloodshot from the smoke, found Mace's. Slowly, with immense effort, he weakly lifted a trembling, soot-stained hand, his fingers lightly brushing Mace's leather-clad arm. No words were spoken, none were needed. In that simple, frail touch, in that lock of gazes, was a universe of unspoken gratitude, a profound, silent acknowledgment of a life given back from the brink. The crowd, which had been held back by an invisible perimeter of fear and awe, seemed to let out a collective, shaky breath. A hesitant smattering of applause started, then swelled, growing louder, mingling with amazed shouts of "He saved him." And that was incredible. "You're a hero." Mace barely registered the sounds. He felt disoriented, exposed. He wasn't accustomed to this kind of attention, this open, unrestrained admiration. He was used to the averted gazes, the muttered suspicions, the feeling of being an unwelcome shadow on the edge of their bright, orderly world. A woman from the crowd, her face streaked with tears of relief, rushed forward, a half-empty bottle of water clutched in her hand. "Here," she said, her voice choked with emotion, pressing it into his hand. You were so brave. My God, so brave." Mace took the water, his own hand shaking slightly, the plastic cool against his heated skin. He managed a rough, "Thanks," his voice hoarse from the smoke and disuse. He avoided her direct gaze, feeling an unfamiliar flush of heat creep up his neck. This strangely, fell harder than facing the fire. Then a younger man and woman, their faces pale and etched with raw panic, burst through the throng of onlookers, their eyes frantically searching. Their terror visibly melted into overwhelming, tearful relief as they spotted the grandpa on the gurney, alive, being tended by the paramedics. "Dad! Oh, thank God, Dad! Are you okay?" the woman cried, rushing to the side, her hand reaching out to touch his. The paramedics gently reassured them, their calm voices a soothing balm. The man, presumably the grandpa's son, his face a mixture of lingering shock and dawning, immense gratitude, turned, his eyes scanning the scene until they found Mace. He strode over, his expression one of awe. You're the one who pulled him out?" he asked, his voice thick with unshed tears. Mace, still on one knee, simply nodded, wiping a smear of soot from his forehead with the back of his bloodied and torn glove. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to thank you," the son continued, his eyes welling up, his composure crumbling. He extended a hand. Mace looked at it for a long second, then slowly, almost reluctantly, rose to his feet and took it. The handshake was firm, heartfelt, conveying more than words ever could. "You saved my father's life. You're a hero." Hero. The word hung in the superheated air, feeling alien and profoundly uncomfortable to Mace. He wasn't a hero. He saw something that needed doing, and he did it. He'd seen it in action before, seen its terrible cost. He muttered something indistinct about being glad he could help, then, acutely aware of the dozens of eyes fixed on him, the weight of their sudden, unexpected approval, he felt an almost irresistible urge to retreat, to disappear. He gave a curt nod to the Jenkins family, another to the paramedics who were now carefully loading Arthur onto the gurney, and then as inconspicuously as a 6'3" leather-clad, tattooed man still smelling of smoke and heroism could, he began to back away towards his patiently waiting Harley, eager to escape the rapidly solidifying spotlight. He craved the familiar, anonymous rumble of his engine, the solitude of the open road. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of the mystery biker hero who'd braved the flames spread through Harmony Creek, like the wildfire he'd so courageously fought. The local newspaper ran a front-page story, accompanied by a surprisingly clear cell phone photo someone had snapped, showing Mace, a dark, determined figure silhouetted against a raging fire, pulling Arthur Jenkins from a wreckage. They didn't have his name at first, just vivid descriptions. A tall, powerfully built man, covered in tattoos, looked like a real tough customer, but he moved like an angel of mercy. Eventually, someone who'd had work done at Mace's Motor Works recognized the description of his unique bike, then the man himself. Reporters, eager for a follow-up, descended upon his garage, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. Mace, uncomfortable and terse, gruffly told him he didn't want to talk about it, that anyone in his position would have done the same thing. A statement that he knew, and they knew, wasn't entirely true. Most hadn't. Life, however, didn't quite snap back to its previous, wary equilibrium. When Mace walked into Rosie's diner for his morning coffee and eggs, the usual hushed whispers that followed him didn't carry their familiar sting of disdain or suspicion. Instead, he heard tones of respect, saw hesitant smiles, received nods of open acknowledgement. Old Mrs. Gable, the same woman who'd flinched from him just weeks before, actually paused by his table. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, a small, genuine smile on her face. "That was a very brave thing you did for Arthur. We're all very proud of you." She even patted his arm before moving on, leaving Mace momentarily stunned, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. Bill, the owner of the rival auto shop across town, a man who'd always treated him with a competitive, cool indifference, crossed the street one afternoon, stuck out a greasy hand, and said, "Mace, damn fine thing you did. Damn fine." Arthur Jenkins, the grandpa he'd pulled from the jaws of death, made a slow but steady recovery. About a month after the accident, Arthur, looking frail but remarkably resilient, leaning on a new wooden cane and accompanied by his grateful son and daughter, appeared at the open bay door of Mace's motor works. Arthur's eyes, no longer clouded with terror but clear and filled with a deep, quiet warmth, met Mace's across the cluttered space. "Mr. Thorne," Arthur began, his voice still a little raspy from the smoke inhalation but firm with conviction. "They tell me you're a man who doesn't like a fuss. But I had to come. My family and we had to see you." He paused, taking a slow breath. "You gave me back my days, Mr. Thorne. You gave me back to my children, to my grandchildren." He gestured to his son and daughter, who were looking at Mace with expressions of profound, unvarnished gratitude. There aren't words enough in any language to thank a man for a gift like that. Mace, a man whose vocabulary usually consisted of direct, functional terms related to engines and steel, found himself utterly tongue-tied. He just shrugged, a familiar gesture of deflection, but this time it felt different, less a shield against perceived judgment and more an awkward acknowledgement of an overwhelming sentiment. "Just glad you're okay, Mr. Jenkins," he managed, the words feeling inadequate, rough around the edges. Arthur's daughter, Sarah, stepped forward, holding out a small, neatly wrapped package. "We wanted you to have this," she said softly. Mace unwrapped it carefully. It was a simple, silver-framed photograph. In it, Arthur Jenkins was beaming, surrounded by a gaggle of smiling, bright-eyed grandchildren of various ages. A picture of pure, unadulterated joy. On the back, inscribed in elegant handwriting, were the words, "To Marcus Thorne, our hero, with love and eternal gratitude, the Jenkins family." Mace didn't hang the photograph in the main, public part of the garage. Instead, he took it into his small, cluttered office, a room that smelled of old invoices and stale coffee, and carefully propped it up on the dusty bookshelf behind his worn desk, where only he would really see it every day. Sometimes, when the last customer had rumbled away and the shop was filled with the quiet hum of cooling engines and the chirping of crickets outside, he'd find his gaze drifting to it, to Arthur's smiling face, to the vibrant life captured in that image. He still rode his Harley, its thunderous roar familiar sound on the outskirts of Harmony Creek. He still wore his faded leather, still bore the intricate tapestry tattoos that told his unspoken stories, still carried the faint silver line of the scar above his eye. He was still Mace. But something fundamental had shifted, not just in the way the town saw him, but, more importantly, in the way he was beginning to see himself. The walls of his fortress hadn't crumbled, not entirely, but perhaps, just perhaps, a window had been unlatched, letting in a sliver of unexpected light, a breath of fresh, clean air. He'd been used to the names, the labels, thug, menace, outsider. He never asked to be called a hero. The words still sat awkwardly on him, like an ill-fitting suit. But in the heart of that raging inferno, beneath the smoke and ash, Marcus Thorne had revealed the truest, unvarnished measure of a man. It wasn't defined by the ink on his skin, nor the aggressive rumble of his motorcycle, nor the stoic, often intimidating scowl he wore like a suit of armor. It was defined by the incandescent courage that had blazed in his soul when everything was on the line, when seconds meant the difference between a family's joy and their deepest sorrow. He became an unwilling, unassuming reminder to a small American town, and perhaps to a wider world that so often judges by appearances, that heroes don't always conform to expectations. Sometimes they wear scarred leather and ride loud machines. Sometimes the roughest, most callous hand perform the most profoundly gentle and noble of deeds. And sometimes the enduring spirit of America, that fierce, undeniable, selfless courage to run headlong toward the fire when every instinct screams to run away, is found beating strong, true, and unexpectedly in the hearts of those who have long walked in the shadows. He was one of them, an everyday American who, when the crucible moment arrived, chose bravery over fear, selfless action over paralyzing apathy, and in doing so, didn't just save a life, but unknowingly ignited a spark of hope and unity in a heartland of a nation built on such quiet, powerful heroism.